Hi, Joe Paprocki from Loyola Press. I'm the national consultant for faith formation there, and I am happy to be the host of this webinar, Spiritual Practices for the Brain, Caring for Mind, Body, and Soul, with Ann Kernian, who I'm going to introduce to you in just a moment. She's very eager to jump in and start sharing some of her wisdom with you. I've had the chance to hear Anne speak in person a number of times. I've read her book. I just love it. And you're going to enjoy this time with her. A couple of quick housekeeping details. One is there will be a recording of this webinar available that will be sent to you so that you can watch it all over again and hear what Anne had to say in case you missed anything or had to get up and get refreshments during this, or you can share it with friends too. Spread the good word. Likewise, just a reminder that we are using a webinar format with Zoom, which means that you will not be able to unmute yourself or turn on your camera. You'll just be hearing and seeing myself and Ann throughout the course of the webinar. Please use the chat to go ahead and introduce yourself. We've already had almost 100 folks do that, telling us where they're from. And thank you for joining us. People from all over the world. Some people are saying good morning. Others are getting ready to go to bed after this because of all the different time zones. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being here with us. If you have questions for Anne, please use the Q&A format, the Q&A feature. And we will be, my friend Denise will be sorting through questions, and we'll have those ready for Anne as we get a little further into the webinar. But let's get moving here and talk a little bit more about our guest. So Ann Kernian, she is the founder of an inspirational greeting card company called Cards by Ann. So quite often when I go to these conferences and Ann is speaking, she's also exhibiting there too. So she's in the exhibit hall selling her beautiful cards, and then she runs over to the presentation hall, gives her presentation, runs back, and it's really just wonderful. But Ann, there's a lot more about you, but I'm going to let you tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Sure.
Welcome. Thanks for
Sure.
being here.
Thanks, Joe. And I've known Joe for a number of years. And those of you who've heard him before, he's just a wonderful human being. So I'm
Thank
thrilled
you.
to be with you today, Joe. So as he said, some of you might know me from my greeting card company, Cards by Ann. I started that just when I was leaving engineering. I got my first degree in environmental engineering and knew I did not want to do that. So after a year, I began teaching myself calligraphy, started Cards by Ann, and went back to school to get my master's in theology. And so I've always been interested in this intersection of science and theology. And then a few years ago, I finished a graduate certificate in positive psychology, along with a certificate in the science of happiness. So I've kind of welded all three of these areas. I began studying neuroscience seriously in 2008 and studying that. So every day I get feeds on that. So the intersection of neuroscience, positive psychology, and spirituality. Those are the three areas that I love sharing with all of my audiences.
Yeah, and you bring them together so beautifully in this in your book, Spiritual Practices for the Brain. Literally one of my favorites from Loyola Press in the past few years, for that very reason, because you bring together the mind, body, and spirit. And in my mind, that is so Catholic. We both come from a Catholic background, and the incarnation is at the heart of our faith. The Word became flesh. Tell us a little bit more about what inspired you to write this book and what people are going to find. What do we mean by bringing together mind, body, and spirit?
Well, as St. Ignatius says, let us find God in all things. And I've really had that sense, that feeling all my life that, God could be found all over in every little domain, in every nook and cranny. And so when I started studying these scientific and psychological disciplines as well as theology, I found their recommendations for a flourishing, healthy human being were really intersecting in beautiful ways. And so I find these practices, knowing that these scientific, that helps our brains, helps our bodies, it's so fascinating, but yet also very motivating. So these practices can not only be part of our spiritual lives, but also boost our physical and emotional well-being. And we can use these practices throughout the day. Some of them don't take any extra time. It's just nurturing that awareness. And all of these lead to greater health, greater happiness, more flourishing as human beings, uniting that mind, body, and soul, which, as you said, Joe, our Catholic faith really has in its tradition.
Yes, and I want to point out to people there's a QR code on the screen right now. If you want to jump to get information about Anne's book right now, go ahead and scan that with your phone, and it'll take you right to where you can purchase her book. But don't panic. I'll come back at the end with more information about how to purchase her book. But let's talk a little bit more about this notion of connecting mind, body, and spirit. And again, as I said, this really resonates with me, and I think that's why I enjoy it so much, because I've learned in the course of my life the interconnectedness of those. Not only do spiritual practices affect our body, but the reverse is also true, that when we are taking care of our body, that we are going to be more spiritually healthy as well. And there's been times in my life where I thought I was physically sick, and I did have physical symptoms, but it turned out that there was really something going on more deep, on a deeper level, a spiritual level, and it manifests in the body. So tell us a little bit more about this. You mentioned in the quote on the screen here, my hope is that you will see the amazing connections between our spiritual practices and our health and our well-being. Say a little bit more about this.
Yeah, as we go through a couple of different practices today, we're going to see that these practices impact our spiritual lives, of course, but because of new technology in neuroscience and new discoveries in positive psychology and research, we see that these spiritual practices have enormous benefits for our brains, our bodies, our emotional lives. And so we'll look at a few of those today. And I want to emphasize, too, for those of you in particular who are science trained like I am, that I only share research that has been peer reviewed, published in blue ribbon journals. I'm not going to share, I always say, what your Aunt Susie told your cousin Lucy. I want to make sure that the information that I share is true, scientifically reviewed and peer reviewed information. And in my book at the very back, there's actually 136 references that if you're looking for the science behind some of these practices, you can delve a lot further and take a look at those. Those are papers and books that I've personally read that have informed my book, Spiritual Practices for the Brain.
And that's another reason that I like the book so much, is because we really need to be doing much more these days, bringing faith and science together. There should not be a conflict there, a dualism. And it's unfortunate that our church often gets a bad rap about that because of, Galileo 500 years ago or whatever, and so on. And yeah, we've had some bad moments about that, but overall, our church has advocated studying science. Our present pope, our last several popes have encouraged this as well. And our young people, many leave the church because they think we don't believe in science. They think that we're just, following a bunch of fairy tales and made up things. And so I think it's very important, that you're saying, God gave us the science. These are gifts from God. Let's look at these and see, how does this reveal more to us about our relationship with God. And so with that in mind, Anne, you selected about 5 different practices for us to look at today. So you ready to jump in?
I can. We can start with the breath.
Okay, let's take a look at this. So the notion of taking a breath, paying attention. And let me just read the quote from your book here. It says, by slowing down and taking a breath every once in a while, we remember that we possess this great gift. It's like we have little retreats throughout our days. And so, talk a little bit about this notion of breathing. What is this great gift that you're referring to?
So you might all know that the word breath is often the exact same, has the same meaning as spirit in many languages. In Latin, spirare is both spirit and breath. Ruah in Hebrew is wind or breath or spirit. In Greek, it's pneuma. So we have this connection between our breath and spirit already just in language. And I would say it's a primary practice. It's the most immediate and accessible because if we're not breathing, we're not alive. So we can use our breath. Each breath we take can connect us, if we're aware, to the spirit. And so we can link our breathing and breathing practices to our chores, even to daily activities like walking through a hallway. But it helps us create space and pauses in our day so that we are present now and reminding ourselves that we're present with God in every breath we take. And it's really one of the healthiest and easiest practices. And it has so many positive benefits for our bodies. And that's what where science comes in, slowing our breath, taking our breath mostly through our nostrils, having longer exhalations. It will decrease our anxiety. It will decrease depression. It decreases stress. But the great thing, and you probably all know that, but what's also interesting is that heart rate variability is a measure of our heart health. And if we breathe correctly, we'll actually increase our heart rate variability. Our immunity can go up. We can also feel more connected. We have more positivity in our lives. And we can see that by taking these pauses every so often, like I said, it's like little bitty mini retreats throughout the day. One of my favorite Catholic teachers is Brother Lawrence, who lived in the 1600s in France. And he says we can have little glances to God. We can give little glances to God throughout our day. So these breathing practices help us to remind ourselves that God is with us. We have this great gift of life. And the breath practices then also help us to grow new neural connections in our brains. And one of the key pieces of these practices is that frequency is more important than duration. So trying to link it maybe to turning on a light switch every time, say, oh, I'm going to take a breath or two, reminding myself that I'm in God's presence, or maybe walking down the hallway if you're at work to another office mate, or even washing dishes, or taking out the trash, watering plants, all, laundry folding, cleaning counters. I mean, we all have lots of chores that we do on a daily basis, but just picking one of those and saying, every time I do that, I'm going to pause and take a deep breath, reminding myself that I'm in the moment here with God. This is a gift. My life is a gift. And we can also use lots of waiting times, like we often have stoplights and we get irritated that we want to more we want to be going along, and instead of living in this moment, whatever we do in our minds is not going to change that traffic light from red to green. And we all know that, but we
Right.
somehow think,
We
oh,
try.
come on, let's go. So think of it as a little gift that, hey, this is a gift of a minute. I have a gift now that I can take this minute and I can just breathe and remind myself that I'm in God's presence. So if we could all just take a few moments, I'd like to invite you to close your eyes, sit up tall, and I'd like to practice what's called the 4-6 breath. And this is noted in my book. So what you're going to do is we're all going to breathe in through our nose for a count of 4, and everybody's counts will be different. So I'm not going to count it for you. And then exhale through your mouth on the count of at least 6, maybe 8. So inhale to the count of 4, exhale to the count of 6 or 8. And I'll ring a little bell both before and when we begin, and then it'll be a minute or less just to practice this healthy 4-6 breath. So here we go. So that just gives you a little taste of that 4-6 breath. And when I'm talking with teachers or religious education teachers, classrooms teachers, I tell them that they can also take short words and long words for the children so that they can remember. So say you want to teach your children saints' names, you can say Saint Anne as the 4 count and Saint Ignatius of Loyola for the long count. And so they can learn other things, or you can use Maine as a state's name and Massachusetts for the count. You can work in some learning skills as well. So
But that
those are
that also sounds like you're advocating the use of a mantra for breathing.
good.
Is that something you
Mhm.
recommend? I mean, you could say, Saint Ignatius on the breath in and then pray for us
Yep.
on the breath out.
Yes. Or be still, know that I am God.
Mm.
You can do, dear God, grant me peace, so you can choose any short little phrases, and that's very calming. Again, it's just a little prayer practice that you can do. And again, just choosing maybe one that you use for a week or a month and maybe changing it only here and there. But it's a nice little like mantra or prayer for tying in that breath with our spirituality.
Yeah, and I have to say, Anne, this is something that I firmly believe in. Reading your book helped to really reinforce that for me. It's a practice that I use. Just last night, I was having a little trouble falling asleep. I was laying on the couch over there reading for an hour or so, and that usually makes me sleepy, but not last night. And then when you're not sleepy, your mind starts to race and so on. So I had closed my eyes and I did the breathing
Mhm.
as you're talking about, and it just brings me into a bit more of a lull. I've done that before as well, on the way to the doctor for a checkup,
Mhm.
and wanting my blood pressure to be at a good level, and breathing just to calm myself and before talks and so on. So, it really is, and I love how you begin by talking about connecting it with our understanding of the Holy Spirit. The story of Genesis, which again that's not trying to teach science, but it's
Mhm.
teaching us, deep truths that
Mhm.
God breathed
Mhm.
into Adam, and that breath is the breath of the spirit that we carry with us. So this is a very, very deep spirit. Any last thoughts you want to add about the notion of taking a breath and paying attention?
One thing I just want to remind people is that, you can teach this breath practice and the other one too to 5-year-olds as well as 95-year-olds. There
Sure.
is no age limit on this. And I find the younger I try to teach these to my young grandchildren, the younger we teach these, the more tools they will have as they go through their life. I didn't learn this until I was in my 30s and 40s. And what a great gift we can give our children and grandchildren to teach these practices no matter what age, or your parents, even if they might be even elderly.
Yeah, great advice, especially for children. Children start experiencing stress at a lot younger ages than perhaps in previous generations. So, great start for us, Anne, talking about this notion of taking a breath, and then something that really segues beautifully because very often when I start to slow myself down and do the breathing. This is what comes next is a reminder to express some gratitude. And you say in your book, when we feel grateful, our brains are flooded with the chemical dopamine, a feel-good hormone. Because of this natural high, we are more inclined to give thanks again and again and again. Let's talk about gratitude, Ian.
Right. So the practice of gratitude, as you said, flows naturally from the breath practices, because when we practice this breathing, we can also be grateful for our breath, our health. We all have so many things to be grateful for. And gratitude thwarts any negativity bias that our ancestral brains kind of give us this bias towards, oh, what's the danger out there? What are the problems? Because that's what kept our ancestors alive. But we kind of have to rewind that and try to start thinking about being grateful and trying to put a positive. And I'm not saying we should be Pollyannas and go about life saying everything's great, but just making sure that when we have gifts in our lives, and we all do. If we're alive, we have multiple gifts around, that we don't just adapt to those gifts and take them for granted. So gratitude thwarts that tendency. There's many ways we can be grateful. We can do gratitude journals. We can use our senses, writing thank you notes that I love to do since I have a greeting card company. But, but being specific when we thank people, I love to send thank you notes to people who are rarely thanked, like I used to go to the gym before COVID, and I wrote a note to my gym teacher, the class teacher, or the woman who sells me paper products for my business. Sure, they're doing their jobs, but have they been truly thanked? And saying thank you as often as possible, when you're in airports or restaurants or at the post office or the bank, people just don't get thanked enough. And we just spread this sense of gratitude. And the more we look for ways to be grateful, the more we look for people to be grateful for and thank them, the more we see. And this practice ramps up the activity in an area of our brain called the hypothalamus. And then, as this quote says, it floods our bodies with dopamine, which makes us feel better. And actually, gratitude has been shown to be an effective treatment for depression. It can be as effective as pharmacology, as some drugs. And I'll talk at the end just about the most effective gratitude practice. But all of these are effective in raising our spirits. And the more we see all these gifts to be grateful for, we wind up judging others less. Our perfectionism decreases. The quality of our relationships goes up. Just imagine if people all around you were constantly thanking you for the things you were doing, how good you would feel and how much closer we feel to one another. So taking all those opportunities to thank our partners, our children, our coworkers, those people who serve us on a day-to-day basis. Again, it decreases our stress. It ramps up our resilience. The stress hormones like cortisol go down. We sleep better at night. Joe was just talking about taking a breath. One of the premier gratitude researchers, Dr. Martin Seligman from University of Pennsylvania, and others, they recommend counting your blessings instead of sheep.
I
So
like that.
we know that quote, this is the day the Lord has made. Let us give thanks and rejoice in it.
Yeah.
Well, let's keep reminding ourselves about that. And again, you can link it to an activity. I personally, my husband calls me a coffee snob because I like to grind my coffee beans
Uh,
every morning. But it takes a few minutes to do that. And so when I grind my coffee beans, I try to think of 3 new things to be grateful for. So this morning, my first thing out of the hatch was, I'm grateful that I have this time to share these practices with all of you. We can be grateful for the rain that's watering the grass. I mean, just thinking about all the different things we can be grateful for. And they are just so effective in so many ways to boost our moods, to boost our bodies, our brains. Again, it's this cross section of these different disciplines go together.
Yeah, and I think to myself, I'm a firm believer in the fact that whenever we find ourselves, kind of having the spiritual doldrums, um, that gratitude is like the first step out of that. That if you're looking to just sort of start to climb out of it, start with gratitude, and no one item is too silly or too small to be included, because I always start with the big things. I'm thankful for my life, my health, my job, my wife, my kids, grandkids, and you keep going, and next thing you know, you're saying that I'm thankful for that sandwich I had at lunch today.
Yeah.
And then you start to think, man, that's a little silly, but it's not. It's really changing the way of looking at everything. And when you get down to it, of course, the Eucharist is a word that means thanksgiving, which is gratitude. So we're called to be a Eucharistic people, and perhaps this is one of your greatest contributions to the Eucharistic revival, is encouraging people to be to share more gratitude.
Yeah, and to be grateful, like you mentioned too, in situations, not necessarily for situations. We can be, and I'll share a real quick story. My mom died about a year ago, and she only had about 2 to 3 weeks notice before she got sick and she knew she was dying.
Mm.
And because of her spirituality, really, all she did in those couple of last weeks, which we all spent with her, was being grateful that she had time to say goodbye. What a
Mm.
lesson it was for all of us.
Yeah.
Sure, she was dying, but she was still saying, I'm so grateful that I have time to wish my grandchildren well, to tell them they're good people, keep using your gifts for the world. Grateful I have this time. So even in the most dire, I suppose, of situations, we can find things to be grateful for.
That's a beautiful story, and thank you for sharing that. And what a gift that was for your mother to be able to have that time
Mhm.
and to be able to thank people. And it segues beautifully into our next point in talking about community and relationships. So your mother saw that as an opportunity not just to thank people, but to acknowledge relationships that sustained her, that she contributed to, that she helped sustain over the course of her life. And you share with us this thought. You say psychologists know that people with high levels of social integration, those in a broad range of relationships, both intimate and casual, tend to be healthier and happier. So, once again, tell us about the connection between something that can be very spiritual, having intimate relationships, and our physical and mental and emotional well being.
And I can start by just telling you that there's been several studies that show that being involved in a church community means longer life, happier lives, healthier lives, all across the board. And there have been really large studies done over 70, 80 years that show that those who live happier, longer lives have one thing in common more than anything else, and that is that they have good relationships. That's it. They are engaged with others in a variety of ways. So it's both strong and close ties, and also what psychologists call weak ties. And what do I mean by that? Well, certainly our strong ties are our families, our friends, our close relationships. But the weak ties are also those people that we see on an infrequent basis. We may not even know their last names. We might only see their names in a tag, but say I go to the pharmacy, and this one woman at the pharmacy where I go tells a joke. And I think she's a special needs person, and she tells jokes to the clients. And I
Hmm.
come up to the door and I say, Hi, Amanda, what joke do we have today? And she's so proud that she has a joke for us.
Oh,
So just
gosh.
that little couple minute of interaction, she's smiling, I'm smiling, we're laughing, and they're really corny jokes, but we both laugh. So just making those, even what could be impersonal little transactions, can be wonderful little opportunities to make that connection again between their spirit and your spirit, treating each person you meet as a valuable human being. Even if you are, say there's someone who cleans your office or your school, or someone you're in a restroom at an airport or a restaurant and someone's cleaning up, thanking them for their
Yeah.
service. Whenever, anytime I'm checking out, like at Home Depot or the grocery store, I look at the tag on the person's lapel and ask them, so Trevor, how's your day been going today?
Nice.
Just making it a real interaction. And for goodness sakes, put your phone back away in your pocket or your purse, so
Amen.
that they know that they're not just a box there doing a job. We recognize them as a real person. And you might be the only person all day long who acknowledges their personhood. And what a gift. What a gift it is to say, I recognize you as another child of God, and I'm going to be sure that I can at least bring a little bit of sunshine into your day.
Isn't that nice when that we can do that? And it's so wonderful when it happens to us too.
Yeah.
Just this morning, I went to the bank. I had to go inside to do a transaction, so I went up to the teller. I haven't gone up to a teller in a bank for years. It's everything's ATM now. And she asked what she could do for me, and I told her about the transaction, and then she said, "And how's your morning been?" And I actually did a double take. I said, "Excuse me?" I wasn't sure I understood what she was asking me. And she goes, "How has your morning been?" I said, Wonderful. Thank you. How about yours? And it just caught me by surprise. I thought, what a lovely
Mhm.
thing that she's acknowledging, validating my very existence. And
Yes.
so I like what you said about, the strong ties, the weak ties, big relationships, small relationships. And I think sometimes those small ones can really make or break a day for us.
It sure can. And you know what happens too is that neuroscience tells us that these little interactions protect our cognitive function. It causes less cellular inflammation, lessens our possibilities of getting heart disease or stroke. I mean, it's worse for us to be isolated on our health than it is to smoke. It's
Mm,
worse. And there is, as our US Surgeon General Murthy tells us, there are a huge number, and depending on what survey you read or what study you read, between 41 and 63% of Americans report being lonely.
yeah.
Being lonely will wind up causing more health issues than even smoking or obesity.
Mm,
It is a crisis in our country. And so being able to create these connections, even short ones. I was on an airplane last week going to the LCWR meeting, the meeting of religious women, and I get on early, and there was a young man sitting in row 4. I was getting into row 3, and so I started bringing my suitcase up to the bin at the top, and he jumped out. He's probably
mhm.
35 years old, and said, "Let me get that for you." And I said, "Well, I did
Nice.
lift weights today." And he said, "Yeah, but you don't have to do it again." And he put my, and I thought, do I look that old that I can't handle it? But it turns out that every single person who was sitting around us anywhere, he jumped up and decided he would put their suitcases up.
Oh,
He
nice.
created this little community. So I was talking to the two sisters next to him, and other people that he was helping. So just in the span of a few minutes, boarding an airplane, Stephen, and I got his name,
Okay.
Stephen created a little community. So, we have this, Nicholas Christakis is a researcher at Yale, and he talks about the impact of our little actions it could be 100 people, it could be 1,000. We don't know what ripple effects our actions have
Mm,
on the community. And we have no idea, but be assured that your good actions have a ripple effect. And you're not only affecting that person who you're speaking with.
yeah, and let me ask you this, Anne, and see if you can just give a half a minute or so to
Mhm.
respond to it. Give some advice for those in our audience, including myself, who tend to be introverts. And, I'm not going to talk to the person next to me on the plane. It doesn't come naturally to me. I put headphones on and so on. When it does happen, it's always lovely, but
Mhm.
my inclination is to not do that. What thoughts do you have or advice do you have for people? We're not going to become
Mhm.
extroverts, and so are we just bound to be lonely, or?
Well, it might, and I'm not a full extrovert. I may sound like it right now, but I'm kind of a balanced introvert extrovert. So I understand that where sometimes we just want to be alone. But just knowing this information of how much it helps us, sometimes that'll motivate us just to get, and it doesn't have to be on an airplane because it could turn into a 2-hour conversation that you really didn't want. But even just those places where there's somebody waiting in line behind you, and it's only going to be for 30 seconds or a minute or two. So just taking those opportunities when it's more of a limited time, it really does make a difference in the quality of your day, and also all these different health effects that can cascade because of our relationships. And I think, just again, going back to gratitude, being grateful that we have the opportunity to say hello to other people, and knowing, our life as Christians is a life of service. And we know that even that might help motivate us. We know that just by maybe greeting another person, we might be serving them, instead of just saying, "I don't feel like it." Maybe we know that we're going to boost their day, and that might be a motivating factor for us as well. So the book has several practices, suggested practices. So there's a bunch of them in there that if you want to know more, you can take a look.
That's very helpful, Anne, and it's very real. I mean, in my presentations with people, I often been talking about evangelization, and some people are just like, I'm not going to go up to other people and start talking about their faith in Jesus. And I get a laugh out of this because I often will ask my audience, so how many of you consider yourself introverts? And usually about 40% of the hands go up. And I say, and another 10% of you didn't raise your hand because you're an introvert. You know, and but I think it's important because we sometimes feel left out. We can feel like we're always being told that we have to be out there and be in people's faces and so on. But we have to be comfortable in our own skin
Sure,
as
sure.
well. And you've given some good advice for us to do that in small ways.
And do a little experiment, see how good you feel
Yeah,
at the end of the day. If you have any aches and pains, those are supposed to go down too by making sure you have those connections. So yeah, just do your own little science experiment.
yeah, for sure. I want to remind folks that if you have questions for Anne, we're about maybe 10, 15 minutes away from doing some Q&A. Put those into the Q&A feature. My friend Denise is behind the curtain and she's going to be looking through those and sorting them out and have them ready. So please use the Q&A feature for any questions you have for Anne. So, and a couple more practices to talk about. And one, again, we've had some nice segues here that, for one good way of taking care of ourselves is to show gratitude, to stop and do some breathing, to make sure we have healthy relationships. But you also broaden this to make it its own category, self-compassion, self-care. So you say in your book, if we work nonstop without taking time for physical, psychological, and spiritual upkeep, we run the risk of serious burnout. So, and I like how you didn't just say self-care, you said self-compassion. Is there a difference?
Um, well, self-care, sometimes people might think it's time to go to the spa and get a spa treatment and a massage and a manicure and pedicure. That's not what I'm talking about.
Okay.
I'm more Frederick and Marianne Broussard say that if we are to bring out the very best that's inside of us, which we all want to do, of course, we must take time to nurture ourselves. We cannot serve others well if our wells are empty. And we know what that feels like. Most of us who were in service lives or any sort of job, really, whether it's a paid job or unpaid job, nurturing attitudes and beliefs to keep our wells filled so that we can be good to those around us and we can serve others well and we can be compassionate towards them, because if we're not taking care of ourselves, we're not going to be happy campers and we're not going to be able to give what our coworkers, our family members, our friends, our community members need. And during difficult times, it's really important, and certainly we've had a lot of difficult times in the past couple of years. The first thing we want to do is just realize that we're struggling, just having the awareness. And again, that's where the breath comes in. If we're taking these breath pauses, we then might become aware and notice that we're struggling, and then just give ourselves a moment or two. One of the researchers, Kristen Neff, just a researcher on self-compassion, says, if you just cross your hands over your chest and close your eyes for just a few breaths, just doing that little self hug, if you will, you wind up increasing the oxytocin in your bloodstream, which is like a mama lion giving her baby cub a little nurturing pet or hug. That means that then our stress can go down, our blood pressure goes down. Sending yourself the same amount of kindness and understanding that you would send to your good friend. I'll give you an example. About 6 weeks ago, we have 4 printers in our Cards by Ann office, and one of the printers is dedicated for labels. And I was just going to print out a piece of paper. I wanted to print out a retreat schedule. And I pressed print and I accidentally pressed the printer with the labels. So instantly I jumped up and grabbed the paper that the label was to try to save the 35-cent label. Right? So I grabbed the label paper, but what happens is I get the paper, but the label runs through the printer.
Oh.
Oh, yeah. So my husband is the IT guy and recruit demand. He worked for several hours trying to repair this printer, and it turned out the printer was done. I had ruined the printer
Oh.
trying to save 35 cents.
Mm.
So We have to buy a several $100 printer. And I started beating myself up.
Mm.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. Why did I reach for that? Why didn't I just let it go? And, sometimes when we're doing that, we also keep recreating in our minds, like we keep thinking about it over and over again, like that's going to cause the scene not to happen. Somehow, if I think about it long enough, I can reverse and go back in time and
Right.
not pull the paper out. Sorry, we're not time travelers. You can't do that.
Right.
So, but I know that if it was one of my coworkers, I would have forgiven them right away. I would have said, we all make mistakes,
Yeah.
part of the doing business, but it took me, and I talk about self-compassion, but it took me a few days. My husband kept saying, Ann, listen to what you tell other people.
Hmm.
We have to allow ourselves the same compassion that we give others. Because again, what good is it for me to ruminate about ruining a printer? Absolutely nothing. It's water under the bridge. Get over it. I am a recovering perfectionist, however, and I don't want to do those things wrong. But keep
Yeah.
keep
Yeah.
telling yourself, how would I treat a good friend? How would I treat my coworker? Treat yourself, talk to yourself in that same way. And when I talk about this on retreats, people are in tears often because I know, that many of us do not treat ourselves like we would
Yeah.
our friends. We
We tend
speak
to
to
be our own worst
our
critics,
toughest.
our own
Yes.
worst enemies. We beat ourselves up over things and don't let go of things. And yeah, I mean, we do want to show some kind of remorse for something we did, but at some point we have to forgive ourselves and
Right.
show some
Right.
self-care. And I'm thinking too, and many of the people who are with us today are in ministry of some kind.
Mhm.
And I think it's one of the dangers of the job is that we beat ourselves up because we deal with so many situations that don't go the way we had hoped they would go. And there's sometimes no way of knowing whether we were successful or not, and so we can really beat ourselves up as ministers to other people. Any thoughts on that?
Well, and I try to keep that St. Francis de Sales quote in mind too. He says, be who you are and be that well. That's all we're expected to do. We aren't expected to be as good as Susie or Frank or, Eugene. We can just be who we are. And that means we are imperfectly perfect. David Benner has this one quote that says, spare me perfection. Give me instead the wholeness that comes from embracing the full reality of who I am, just as I am. It is this whole self that is perfect. So your friend isn't perfect. I'm not perfect. Joe's not perfect. No one's perfect. Remember that if God wanted us to be perfect, we would have been made perfect. So you know what?
Yeah.
We all do our best.
Yeah, absolutely. And good advice. I tend to also, like you said, be a perfectionist in some ways. I remember the last webinar that I did went about 7 or 8 minutes overtime, and I felt horrible. I just felt like I was such a failure, not doing a better job of moving things along. Now, it's not to, in any way trying to give you a message, and that we need to speed things up. We're actually right on time. But having said that, you have one more practice you want to share, and then
Right.
we're going to ask you
Yeah.
to tie up a couple of loose ends before we get to
Sure.
Q&A. So I see there are
Sure.
7 or 8 questions already in the queue, and
Okay.
now's your chance to go into the Q&A and write down a question, type in a question. But you're going to, last practice you're going to spend with us, Anne, is telling us to go outside.
Right.
Enjoy
Get
nature and
outside.
all. You say that psychologists conclude that spending time in nature nurtures our health in a variety of ways. Tell us some of those
Oh,
ways.
and we have this great gift of creation, and the Psalms talk about it over and over again. And if I could choose only one spiritual practice of my own that contributes the most to my own happiness, to my own spiritual well-being, to lessen stress, providing moments of awe, it is nature and awe. Every morning I do a little prayer walk. First thing out of the chute before I do even grind my coffee beans
Eh?
is I go outside, no matter the weather, and walk in the woods. We have woods right outside our house for about 20 or 30 minutes and just look at creation. Just enjoy the birds, enjoy the trees. And what's the great thing about this practice is you don't even have to go outside into woods. You can even watch a nature video video, and it
Is that
still
true?
has great benefits for your stress levels, for your heart, your immunity, all these different great physical attributes happen. Since I was a young girl, I have found nature to be, I just was always climbing trees, and I just felt so close to the divine being outside. And like I said, you can just watch a video. You don't even have to go outside. Or if you can sit in your house and look at a tree, even see the
Yeah.
wind blowing in the tree, you don't even have to be outside. But we know that being in nature lowers our cortisol, it lowers our blood pressure, it increases our mood, decreases depression and anxiety. There are national parks in the Northeast, at least, and they may be across the country now, that you can appear at the gates of the national park with a prescription from a doctor, and the doctor saying, my patient needs to be in nature, and they will be admitted free of charge
Wow.
into the park, because physicians now know that even just walking in nature or just sitting, you don't even have to walk. Being in nature will lower people's depressive symptoms. It
Mm-hmm.
may not be, persons may still need to take their medications,
Mm-hmm.
but it's been a great boost for both anxiety and depressions.
I
Um,
can vouch for that, Ann. I know that there was a time in my life I was going through a bit of a dark spell, and my wife kept on telling me, "Come on, let's get out." And she would
mhm,
just make me get in
mhm,
the car, and we would ride to a forest preserve, sit there,
mhm,
look at the trees, walk around the lake. And
mhm.
she knew anytime that I would reach that point of just feeling, despair,
Yeah.
come on, we're going outside.
Yeah. And anytime I have, an article to write or I have a retreat to give, I have to spend time both meditating and being in nature to allow that creativity to kind of spur. We know creativity is increased, our empathy for others, our sense of awe, like the realization that we are small compared to this big created world. So, really there's so many ways that we wind up being helped by going out into nature. And, even just looking at the stars at night and seeing those stars, we know that even that reduces our cravings if you're trying to quit smoking or drinking or overeating. It also, being in nature and awe, distracts our minds from negative thoughts that might be coming through our minds. So we know that just going for a walk or being out in nature, and people did that a lot during the pandemic because that
Sure.
was one of the things. And I noticed that the big park near us is more crowded now than it ever was before the pandemic, because
Hmm.
people discovered how much being in nature helped. So,
And people are still looking for healing, and so they're doing
yes,
things like that. Yeah,
yes,
that just makes a lot of sense. And I was thinking too that it's no coincidence that retreat centers are usually in natural
beautiful
settings.
places.
I mean, how many retreats have you given in high rises, downtown?
Right.
Uh, Typically,
Yeah.
so that we can go outside. You give a talk and then tell people go for a walk and so on.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
a last thought about nature and awe before we wrap things up?
Yeah, there's lots of big studies that show that being in nature is healing. Huge studies, 2 million people in some of the studies. So just giving yourself a chance, again, it could just be a plant in your house and just taking some time to look at it, or watching a David Attenborough nature video. One of my favorites is the documentary The Octopus, a nature video. But just knowing that being in nature will boost your both psychological, cognitive, spirit, mind, body, and take a look at that and see if that'll help any of you or your family members as well.
Wonderful advice. And folks, please know that we have just hit the tip of the iceberg here. Anne goes into many more practices in her book. She chose five of them to share with us today. And we're going to go to Q&A in just a minute or so, but did want to alert people to another feature that you have in the book at the end. So each chapter has like a different practice that you talk about, but then at the end, you give us some ABCs. And
Right.
obviously, again, we're not going to have time to go through all of these, but what's the idea here? Why did you come up with these? And maybe give one or two examples.
Sure. I did this just because it's a nice little appendix, in a sense, that says, here's some other opportunities. Choose one or two. One of the main pieces I want to make sure all of you take from today's little webinar is Start small. Don't try to do all 5 of these, or when you get the book, all 11 or 12 of them. What practice is most attractive to you? Which one is easiest to fit into your days, your busy schedule? And it's motivating to know how much these spiritual practices will enhance your physical, emotional, psychological, cognitive health. But all of these, all these A through Z's, and Z's I kind of cheated because I said sleep because I couldn't find
I love it.
not
I
too many
love the
Z's.
Z's.
Just choosing a practice or two that you can fit into your day, and see how that spiritual practices nourishes your spirit, your mind, your body, your soul.
Great, Anne. Well, thank you for sharing that. And we have some people who have been asking questions, and Denise is sorting through them, and now she's appeared with us on screen here. So, Denise, I'm going to turn it over to you to lob some questions Anne's way.
Hi,
Oh,
Denise.
hi, Anne. We're going to start with Christine's question, and she says, I know self-nurturing is good, but I feel guilty taking the time for myself. How
Yeah.
can I get over this?
Okay, think about all the people. I get this question a lot. So think about all the people who you could help even more if your well was filled. Think, sometimes we're running on almost empty, but we think we have to keep pushing through because we want to help, we want to serve, etc. Taking a step back allows us to be more in touch with the wealth of energy, the wealth of resources that we have inside that we are not going to get access to if we are running ourselves down. So if you can just think about that. Is it Denise you said is the person?
Christine asked that.
Christine, yes. Just remember that you're going to be able to be, and the other thing is, remind yourself of how good it is for your own health, for your cognitive health, for your psychological health, for your physical health, to take care of yourself, because those around you want you to be healthy, want you to live with them for a long time. So think of them too while you're nurturing yourself.
Thank you, Christine. Good question. Next.
Angela says, regarding the weaker relationships, can you suggest a way to use this practice of acknowledging another's personhood when they're taking actions against you, like they're being bullying or manipulating?
Wow. Wow, that's a tough one. What I notice when people might come at oneself with some anger or etc., is to, if we have been using those breathing practices and staying grounded, by coming back with compassion, that can diffuse their anger or whatever they're bullying, whatever's coming at us. We certainly know that fighting fire with fire doesn't work. And if we can just come back and take a deep breath and show through our own actions that we're going to remain calm and centered, that perhaps that can be contagious to that other person who might be bullying. And then if it doesn't, then perhaps we just need to walk away.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, Anne. I have seen that work on occasion where um, responding with compassion can soften the other person. That you might say something like, "Ouch, are you okay?" That you acknowledge that they did something to really, hurt you, but then you respond by asking them, what's going on?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's a
They've had
tough
a
one,
hard
but
day.
good
Yeah.
advice.
Yeah.
Angela, thank you.
Thanks, Angela.
Mary asks, what about music? That helps me.
Yes. Well, I didn't have a chance to talk about that, but yes, music, I think that's one of the A through Z's that I talk about, but music is a huge, huge spiritual practice that nurtures. In fact, when I give my retreats on self-compassion, I talk about how much music can be a part of our self-nurturing, our self-care, our self-compassion. And just listening to music, I love listening to chants. I love playing the piano. Anything that kind of immerses ourselves in the gifts of music. It's a wonderful practice, and one that has been shown, neuroscience studies have shown that it really helps our brains and our bodies as well when we immerse ourselves in music.
Couldn't agree more. I have music on all the time. My wife kids me. She says, "You're always humming." I'm like, that probably gets a little irritating at times, but yeah, I mean, music. In fact, when we turned on to start the webinar, I realized that I was sitting here humming to myself. I thought, okay, you know. Thank you, Mary. Good question
Thanks,
about
Mary.
music. Next.
Well, Pam's is a comment, but I think it's a nice one to share. She says for the last several Lenten seasons, she's reached out to 40 people who have touched her life and
Mm.
says that was an awesome joy for me to do. And she wanted to share that with us.
Fantastic. Yeah, I have a friend too. When she turned 60, she wrote notes to 60 people,
Wow.
thanking them for their presence in her life. Yeah, those are, anytime we do those sorts of things, speaking of a Lenten practice, though, it's one I think I recommend in my book, was I recommended people to every time they opened and closed a door, that could be a time when they could take a deep breath and remind themselves of being in God's presence. So even in, opening and closing a door, but yeah, thanking people regularly, it brings so much joy to both the giver and the receiver.
Thank you. Mary is right. Is that Mary?
Thanks,
Uh,
Pam. That
that
was
was
Pam.
Pam.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Pam.
Oh, Pam. Yes, Mary was the one before that. Thank you, Pam, for that question. We have time for a couple more. Go ahead, Denise.
Okay. I'm not sure this person's name registered as anonymous, but asks, do you think meditating and being in nature are complementary practices?
Yes. You can meditate sitting down, certainly, or sitting in the church pew, but being in nature can be absolutely a meditative practice. And that's what I do in the mornings. You can be in nature and you can have those 1,001 thoughts running through your mind, what I'm going to do when I get finished, blah, blah, blah. But the most nurturing for our brains and our bodies is taking a prayerful, meditative attitude out into your walk, or if you're just sitting in nature and just trying to observe, choosing just to pause the thinking, the overactive mind, and just observing all the gifts that are around us in nature. It is truly a meditative practice, and one that has, again, great benefits for our brains and our bodies.
Thank you, Anonymous. One of those introverts that we were talking about, right? How about one more, Denise? These have been wonderful questions, and I'm glad we got to so many of them.
Okay, we actually got a few comments about people wanting to maybe share this recording with folks they know or care for with dementia. And Jewel asked specifically, do you have any experience using some of these techniques with people with dementia or Alzheimer's, or have any suggestions there?
I know that these techniques will help protect our brains from Alzheimer's, or will allow Alzheimer's to display itself later on in life, but I have not given a retreat or a workshop to those with Alzheimer's, although I have given them with elderly sister groups. And a few of the things that they can do is practice the gratitude, those sort of practices, asking the people to think about a few things they might be grateful for, because sometimes short-term memory is not good, but long-term memory is good. And let me link it back to the music. We know that if we play music from people's early lives, their young adult, early, professional lives even, or home lives, we know that that will spark memories too. And will also, people can sometimes sing lyrics to songs from their youth that they would never have been able to do if they had just been asked to remember the lyrics. But when they hear the music, they're able to do that. So that's one practice that I would highly recommend for dementia and Alzheimer's patients. But just trying to maybe teach people to breathe a little bit, taking a deep breath through the nose, releasing it through the mouth. That might be a simple way to pray. But the other thing is too, is that what are the prayers of one's youth? What are the ones that we remember? And those are ones, perhaps they prayed the rosary when they were younger, or they did the Our Father and Hail Mary. Having people do those old prayers that they learned so long ago, those are really effective for people who are losing their memory.
Those are powerful, powerful answers. And my dad had Alzheimer's. He passed away almost 25 years ago, and music was a powerful thing. He loved classical music, so sometimes he'd come over and I'd put on, some Tchaikovsky 1812 overture, and he would brighten up right away. And then to say, "Oh, you recognize it? What is that?" And he would tell me what it was.
Oh,
Another good example is Tony Bennett, who just passed away
yes,
recently,
Mhm.
and
Yes.
how Lady Gaga told us how, he was having trouble remembering even her,
hmm
but
hmm
he could recall the songs, and that's why he was
hmm
able to sing and
To
perform
sing.
up
Yeah.
until a year or so before he passed. So
Yeah.
powerful
Wonderful.
things. Thank you. That was Jewel who had the last question.
Yes.
Thank
Great.
you, Jewel. And thank you, Denise, for sorting those out and presenting them to Anne. It was great that we were able to get to so many of them, but alas, our time has run out. And but Anne, I can't thank you enough for the time that we spent together. I could talk to you all day. I could listen to you all day. You have so much to share, and it's such a gift for all of us. Thank you for the privilege of having this hour with you and spending that time with us.
I'm so grateful to be able to share these because the more people who know about these practices, the more we can spread the good word to everyone we know.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you to all of you for joining us today. The book is Spiritual Practices for the Brain. Once again, there's a QR code on your screen. You can take your phone out right now and set it to camera and scan that. It'll take you right to the Loyola Press website where you can purchase it, or you can go online to store.loyolapress.com. You can call Loyola Press customer service at 800-621-1008. And during business hours, talk to a real live human being. And also, the recording will be available soon at loyolapress.com. So, thank you all once again, and may the Holy Spirit continue to guide all of us to be healthy in mind, body, and spirit. Thank you, and until next time, God bless.
Bye. Thanks.